In this lesson, we will be considering the associative property. This is a property that is often hard for people to remember, and it is one that is commonly confused with the commutative property. So what we're going to do in order to help you remember this property and how it works is to look at an example and try to put some meaning behind the word associative, and we're going to look at a word that's related to that, the word associate. In mathematics, when you hear the term associative property, think of the related word associate. People you associate with are your friends, people you hang out with, or you can think associate, which would be, say, a business partner. So let's say you're going to a party and these two groups of characters are there, and in you come. Are you going to stay here and associate with this group, meaning are you going to be grouped with them, or are you going to head on over to this group and associate with them? The associative property has to do with grouping. So remember associate when you hear associative. So remember that the associative property has to do with associating things, with grouping things. So let's take a look at some mathematical examples of this. On each side of this equation, I have the same numbers, and I've got addition all the way through, but I've grouped the numbers differently. The associative property tells us that the result is the same either way. Now, you might think, well, it's evident that it's the same because I have the same numbers and I'm adding all the way through. But the order of operations tells us that we need to do what is in parentheses first. So actually, these problems are worked in two different ways. Here we have 1 plus 5, since we need to do what's in parentheses first. On the other side, we have 3 plus 3, but either way, we get 6 is equal to 6. So both of these have the same value. A more general way of stating this property is A plus parentheses B plus C is equal to A plus B plus C. Does this work for any other operations? Well, let's consider multiplication. Let's say we have 2 times 3 times 4, and the 3 times 4 is grouped together in parentheses. And let's see if that's equal to 2 times 3 times 4. Remembering that we need to do what's in parentheses first, on the left-hand side we have 2 times 12. On the right-hand side, we have 6 times 4, and when I simplify further, we see that we have 24 is equal to 24. So yes, in fact, these things are the same. More generally, we can say that A times B times C is equal to A times B times C, and this is known as the associative property of multiplication. In looking at the associative property, we've considered addition and multiplication, and we've seen it to work for those two operations. So let's also consider subtraction and division. I've put a subtraction problem and a division problem up here with a question mark over each equal sign because we're checking to see if it works here as well. Same numbers on both sides, same operations for each, all the way through for each of these two problems. Seems like it should work, right? Well, let's try. Doing what's in parentheses first, we get a 5. 10 minus 5 leaves us with 5. On the other side, 10 minus 7 gives us a 3, and then when we subtract 2, we're left with a 1. These are not equal, so the associative property does not work for subtraction. Let's try division, doing what's in parentheses first. 10 divided by 2 is equal to 5. We have 20 divided by 5, which gives us 4. On the right-hand side, we have 20 divided by 10, which is 2, and then if I divide that by 2, I get 1. So here also we see that the associative property does not work. The associative property works for adding and multiplying, but not for subtracting or dividing. And remember that associative is similar to the word associate. It has to do with groups or with the grouping of numbers. It's easy to make the mistake of thinking that anything that you see that has parentheses in it or involves grouping is the associative property, and you need to be aware that that is not the case. These three equations all involve grouping, they all involve parentheses, but none of them involves the associative property. Take a look at the first equation, the one with the numbers 1, 2, and 3. Notice that the grouping has not changed. The order has changed, but it remains 2 and 3 that is in parentheses on the left and on the right. This is actually an example of the commutative property because it's order that has changed, not grouping that has changed. In the second equation, you have a similar situation. On the left side and on the right side, 7 and 5 are grouped together, so the grouping has not changed, even though the order within the group has changed. So this also would be an example of the commutative property, but not the associative property. And if you look at the third equation, you'll see grouping there as well. But remember, we had an associative property for addition or for multiplication, but not for both at the same time. This last example is actually an equation that demonstrates the distributive property. So be very careful that you can distinguish the true associative property from the imposters.